In today's video, I wanted to discuss whether or not the advice you get from Google Ads support reps or account representatives is ever really worth pursuing. So, this particular page I've got loaded, really just to have something on screen, is quite a old post now from the official Google support forum for Google Ads. Pretty much, you can see the title here: "How do I get Google reps to stop calling me?" The poster, the OP, is complaining that Google Ad representatives keep calling business lines and sending emails, and there's a typical sort of Google-esque type response that Google doesn't send out harassing phone calls and emails and so on, although maybe some of the original content in the OP's post was a little bit, confusing. But a lot of people in here, if you jump through, and I'll leave a link in the video description to this thread, there's just tons and tons of people all saying the same kind of thing. Google keeps calling me. Google keeps emailing me. There's some examples here of the kind of content that you'll get. You've probably experienced it if you're watching this video. So Ryan Smith 650 on the 23rd of March 2020, he says, "I'm having the same issue. They call over and over and then send me emails like this. Hi, I'm the account strategist at Google assigned to your ads account. I tried reaching out to you several times, but you're unavailable. Blah, blah, blah." You know the script. You know the drill. You've been here before. As a Google Ads specialist who's got various different client accounts under my manager account, I would probably not go a single day without getting at least 2 to 3 of these phone calls. I think my record's about 10 in one day, typically coinciding with when whoever is the account specialist, they seem to go in sort of phases around quarters or months sometimes. They change, typically quarterly, though, has been my experience, and they change over to a new specialist. And then you get the whole cycle start again of these kind of endless calls. You get the email follow-ups. And over time, they've become more and more aggressive as well, to the point now where I'm finding the account reps from Google are actually going and directly trying to contact the clients, for example, to push them in the direction of implementing Google's recommendations. So actually saying, "Hey, ignore your freelancer, your specialist. We know what we're talking about. Implement our recommendations." And so, long story short, this is unlikely to change. And ultimately, Google is doing it for a simple reason. And these specialists are not really here to help you too much. They're just here to sell more features, to get you to buy more advertising from Google, to get you to try out new features that might benefit your business and your advertising, but are guaranteed to benefit Google, basically. So, should you ever pay attention to what these account specialists have to say, or should you just ignore them? Look, long story short, I cannot think of a single time where I have come across a scenario in which a Google Ads specialist or account representative, or whatever terminology you want to use, has given good advice for a smaller advertiser. So I want to caveat this by saying that for bigger businesses, and I'm talking about businesses spending substantial amounts of money on Google advertising, big enough to get a higher level of support, some of the advice can be quite good. And sometimes you might be able to access that advice through, a agency, for example, that's like a higher tier Google partner. They might have their own support available that they can effectively farm out to their clients and get better support. I'm going to give you an example from an old job. I used to work for a sort of multi-division retail company here in New Zealand that's one of the biggest retailers in the country. And because our wider business group spent a huge amount of money with Google every year, well into the six figures, it might have been into the seven figures by that point, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, we actually had a dedicated account representative who was an Australian guy, who was tasked with looking after both sort of Australian and New Zealand clients. And he actually moved over to New Zealand at one point, if my memory serves me correctly. And this particular representative wasn't the same kind of person you get ringing you multiple times a day, sending you these irritating, sort of harassing emails, saying, book in your free scheduled consultation and all those kind of things. This guy gave some really, really good advice when it was needed. For example, we had challenges with getting some products approved to advertise via Google Shopping. We had challenges with, various, restrictions based on policies because of some of the products we were selling and so on. And every time he was actually able to do a really good job at going back up the chain on his side and supporting us. But we only got that support because of the amount of money we were spending with Google. If you're a smaller advertiser, if you're spending $500 a month or $1,000 a month or $200 a month, or you're just testing Google Ads, the calls you get from these call centers, in effect, or outreach centers, which are typically all outsourced, they're not internal Google employees, you're almost never going to find good advice. All of it is just structured around trying to get you to increase your budget when you don't necessarily want to increase your budget, or turn on features like search partners or display expansion when you don't necessarily want to do that, or run a performance max campaign even if it doesn't necessarily make sense for what you're doing. Because ultimately, the KPIs for these particular account reps for smaller scale accounts is not really about getting you better performance. It's just about getting you to sign up to new features, to try them out, to spend more money with Google. That's what the measure of success is from Google's perspective. Now, there might be some nuggets of wisdom from time to time, but I've sat in on so many of these calls. I've looked over emails. Typically, they won't give you a lot of advice over emails, but some of them I've found if you really pressure them enough and say, "I only consider your advice if you email it to me," you'll get them to reveal some advice. And the reason they want you on a call is so they can get you to make the changes on the call, or even approve making the changes themselves, which I've seen done before. There seems to be quite sort of loose operating procedures to how some of these account reps work, some following the rules more than others. And ultimately, having, for many years now, sat in on these calls, listened to them, heard feedback from what clients are saying, where they said, "Oh, yeah, we worked with Google and they gave us this call and we changed things that they recommended and it didn't work out very well." I'm really yet to see more than a handful of examples out of probably into the hundreds now of these different calls that I've either personally been part of or have good knowledge of from my clients or other Google Ads experts. It'd only be a small, tiny little fraction, enough to count on one hand probably, where I've actually seen good advice that's resulted in improvements to the client's advertising performance. Typically speaking, the advice you're going to get is not going to be good. It's nothing you couldn't work out yourself by even just looking at things like the optimization score and recommendations section, because normally all they're doing is going through where you've got open recommendations under the optimization score for campaigns and saying, "Oh, you should tick this because you'll get a better optimization score." I would just ignore the advice. I would just say thanks, but no thanks. You can try blocking the phone numbers, and you'll find that they'll call you from different phone numbers because the phone numbers change every so often. You can get one account rep who's looking after your account to leave you alone sometimes, and as soon as the next quarter rolls around and they change, it's back to the next one following you up. It really is a bit of a nightmare. I think ultimately there should be a blanket opt out of advice setting that you can pursue. But at the end of the day, this is a upselling technique for Google. And presumably it must work, because otherwise they would have stopped doing it, despite the fact that it really annoys a lot of people, myself included. It's, I've had calls at all kind of crazy hours of the day. They don't seem to understand very well that there are different time zones in the world. So I'll get calls at 7:30 at night when I'm trying to put the baby down to bed, or I'm trying to sit down with my wife to have dinner. I'll get these calls that keep coming through. If you pick them up and you make the mistake of responding to a new phone number you don't recognize and then hang up because it's, "Hello, someone from Google speaking," they know your phone number's active, you're going to start getting spammed with more of these calls. It's just very frustrating. But as a blanket rule, I would say no, as a small to medium advertiser who's getting that level of support. Different if you're getting specialist, Google account representative who is being assigned to your business because you've spent enough money with Google. And if that's the case, you'll know that's the case. But for these sort of unsolicited outreach calls that you get from Google, or outreach emails, where it's all typically clearly outsourced, usually coming from India or Philippines, not to say that you can't get great digital marketers from that part of the world, you definitely can. But typically that's one of the characteristics of this type of outreach you get, is the location where it's coming from, whereas the higher quality, higher spend reps come from typically the local area, like the Asia Pacific or Australia or New Zealand or United States. You'll usually get that support from someone more local. With these high volume salespeople, basically, I'm yet to see any good advice, and I just advise avoiding it altogether. So keen to hear your thoughts. If you had good advice that's worked, I'd love to hear what you were recommended to do. But as a blanket rule, I'd say just ignore the calls and ignore the emails. Nothing's going to happen to your account. Just keep ignoring them. And it's a frustrating part of dealing with Google, but it's just one of those things that you have to put up with. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you've got any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you next time.